So, where we're standing right now, you're in the middle of a place called New Yard. And this is New Yard because it's the newer part of an area called the Yard. The Yard's a big square in the middle of campus, a big fenced-in area. The building behind me is Widener Library. Widener Library was built in memoriam of a guy named Harry Elkins Widener. Harry was a student here. He graduates in 1907. This building is constructed in his memoriam in 1915. So if you think about that for a second, you're a young guy, you just graduated, you're 21, 22, and a few years later you have a building in your memoriam. What happened to poor Harry? Harry's a bibliophile, he loves books. So upon his graduation to celebrate, he goes over to Europe on a rare book hunting expedition. And while he's over there, he finds the Gutenberg Bible, which is one of the first books ever printed. He packages that Bible up, sends it back to Harvard. Harvard has that book today. But on the way back from Europe to America, in 1912, there was one fastest mode of transportation. How would you go from Europe to America in 1912? Guess. A boat. Famous boat. The most famous boat. Guess. Movie. Your favorite movie, Leonardo DiCaprio. Mom?
You know this one.
Titanic.
Titanic.
Titanic. Harry and his dad, they board the Titanic. They had first-class seats, so they had access to lifeboats. But they give up their seats for women and children, and sadly, they go down with the ship. Now, Mrs. Widener, after that happens, when she hears the news, she's heartbroken, she's distraught. So she comes to Harvard and she says, "Harvard, will you please take my $3.5 million, which is about $50 million today. Would you please take my $3.5 million, and could you build a library in my son's honor?" And Harvard, they get together, they think real hard about it, and they said, yes. They tear down the old library and they build this one instead. Now, Mrs. Widener, she was really worried someone else is going to come along, tear down her library that they had built, this one, build a library for their kid in their honor. So she had a couple rules put in place to ensure this building didn't go anywhere. First rule, a portrait of Harry needs to hang up in the main hall, and fresh flowers need to be brought to his table every single morning. And that's a tradition that holds true today. Harry's portrait still hangs up in the main hall, and a curator brings fresh flowers to his table every single morning. Second rule, Harvard students need to pass a swimming test, because Mrs. Widener believed if Harry knew how to swim, he would have made it back home. So that was a tradition that actually happened here on campus. Every single year, the graduating class was put through a swimming test. And they had to prove that they could swim in the Charles River in order to graduate. It stayed that way until the Americans with Disabilities Act changed all that, and we did away with it. Third and finally, this is the most important rule, the one that holds the most true today. No major alterations to this building. What that means is the steps you see, pillars you see, bricks you see are the same way now as they were in 1915. Now, no major alterations, what that really means is no major sections can be removed, but also no major sections can be added. So, when Harvard was expanding their library, adding more and more and more books, there was really only one place to go, and it was down. Which means beneath our feet, beneath where you're sitting, recording this video, beneath where you're standing right there, the books go down 6 stories. There's over 50 miles of books in the stacks of Widener Library, which means you can run 2 marathons down in the stacks, never pass the same book twice. There you go. Students go down there all the time, they get lost, they have to call up to a special department called Search and Rescue. Librarians go down and find them out. Stacks of Widener Library is also a great place to hook up. It's a famous tradition. You go down into the stacks and you hook up with somebody you like. Have sex in the stacks. Like that one? Now, if any of the traditions are broken, if they try to change the building in any major way, then the famous myth is that the books no longer belong to Harvard. They have to donate them to the city of Cambridge. Harvard wants to keep the books because they're worth a lot of money, so they follow the rules. Cheers. So where we're standing is a good look at the rest of New Yard, the newer area. We're looking at, first off, this big building behind me where they've set up stage for commencement exercises or graduation is known as Memorial Church. Memorial Church is a non-denominational church, meaning it's welcome to anybody of any background, of any religion. You can get married at Memorial Church, people often do, but if you choose to do so, the current wait time, if you put your name on the list right now, is 7 years. So you might not want to get married by the time you get there. This is also where we line up, as you can see, about 20, 30,000 chairs for graduation. A lot of famous speakers come and talk to the graduating class. They include Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, J.K. Rowling, Seth Rogen, Conan O'Brien, Oprah. The last speaker to speak here was the Chancellor of Germany, who is Angela Merkel. And the current speaker for the class of 2022 is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. So that's kind of neat. And then maybe you get a little tired watching graduation, because graduation can take anywhere from 2 to 3 to 6 to 7 to 8 hours long. Sometimes you're here all day watching graduation. So you take a look at some of the buildings around you. Some of the buildings include Seaver, which is a big red building off to my left. Seaver Hall is mostly classrooms, classroom buildings. And Seaver's kind of rare because it's one of the only buildings on campus dedicated to classrooms. Most of the time we're taking classes in the libraries, in the museums, in the theaters. So every building is multi-purpose. Or maybe you take a look off to your right, you see University Hall. University Hall, a big gray building to my right. University Hall is mostly deans, administration, that sort of thing. Sort of like a big front office for us. And if you get really exhausted, you can turn around your chair and your eyes fall on the big, beautiful building in the back, which is Widener Library. So, what we're looking at here is this big, ugly monstrosity. This big, ugly thing is the Science Center. The Science Center has more complex and intricate technology on every floor, leading to 2 telescopes up at the top and an observatory. And they say you can tell how smart a Harvard student is based off which floor they take classes on in that building. So if you take class on a higher floor, you're a smarter student. I don't necessarily buy that. Every class I took in there was in the basement. So, you know. Yeah, you like that one? And then over on this way, off to my left, is Memorial Hall. A lot of people think it's a church. It looks real nice. It's not a church. It was built to honor Civil War soldiers. The long attachment to Memorial Hall is Annenberg Dining Hall. Annenberg Dining Hall is a first-year only dining hall. So the first-year students have the special privilege of eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner in there. That's where they stay. And this is a good opportunity to talk about a little bit about you know, some of the education system, some of how things here work. So the famous saying in the 70s, President Lowell said Harvard students should know a little bit about everything and then something very well. So our little bit about everything is a general education. We take classes in math, science, history, English, you name it, we take it. And then the something very well is what we study very specifically. What we call that is our concentration. It's synonymous with major and minor. My concentration was English, specifically screenwriting. What that means for me is, well, every single year Harvard selects a couple students, 2 students, to instead of writing an academic thesis or an academic paper, you write a creative thesis or a screenplay. And so my pitch was accepted, and a few weeks ago I submitted that screenplay. I'm one of those few students on campus. Kind of neat. Matt Damon was doing something similar. He turns in his creative thesis to his professor around December. He says to his professor, hey, teach, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is bad. You know, this needs help. The professor, rather than giving Matt Damon a bad grade, would edit it, hand it back to Damon, say, hey, Damon, keep working on this. This is pretty good. Damon would keep working on it, become what is now known as Good Will Hunting. He'd drop out and pursue it, and he'd win an Oscar. So it just goes to show you all I got to do now is drop out. Now, a couple more things. Weird thing about the Science Center, was built during a time called Brutalist design. Brutalist design was popular for only about 3 years. They only built a couple of buildings during that time because it's so ugly. They built the Science Center and they built Mather House, which is my house. The tower in Mather House is so ugly that if you buy a postcard from Cambridge today, they actually airbrush it out of the skyline so you don't have to look at it. And that's true. And the building directly behind you, which is another student dormitory, is Thayer Hall. Thayer Hall is famous because very famous former Vice President Al Gore lived in Thayer, as well as famous actor Tommy Lee Jones. Al Gore and Tommy Lee Jones were roommates in Thayer back in the 60s. It's kind of neat. A lot of famous people in the area, famous buildings, and good opportunity to see how some of the education system here works. This is the John Harvard statue. It was cast in 1884 by a guy named Daniel Chester French. It's the 3rd most pictured statue in the United States, right behind the Statue of Liberty and the Lincoln Memorial. It's this statue. Now, all that history aside, We know it, Harvard students know it, as the statue of 3 lies. And it's a statue of 3 lies because of this engraving here on the front. This engraving says John Harvard, founder, 1638. John Harvard, founder, 1638. First lie, date is wrong. This place is founded in 1636. It's founded by the Massachusetts Bay Colony, some of the first people from Europe. They come over to America. They found a place called New College. Now, New College, it doesn't have anything. It's just an idea, a tree stump, a plot of land. It wasn't until a couple years later a guy by the name of John Harvard comes along and he donates. He donates some land, some money, and a collection of books. Books were really rare at the time. Because of his generous donation, we've been calling the campus in his honor ever since Harvard. Which brings us to our second lie. Founder. He's not the founder, just a donator. Massachusetts Bay Colony founded the place. So, the date is wrong, he's not the founder, and also this isn't John Harvard. There was a big fire here in the 1700s, and the John Harvard Library, it burns to the ground. So does every picture, image, likeness of good old Mr. Harvard. So, when Daniel Chester French comes along 100 years later, he has no idea what the man looks like. So who is this mystery man? And for a long time, historians, scholars thought maybe it's just a descendant of John Harvard, some great grandkid, some cousin. That theory held some water until you find out who John Harvard was. See, John Harvard, he was a sickly man. We found out from journals, some writings. Sickly guy. He had a bad back, he had a rickety wrist. Mostly he was malnourished, he died at 31, no kids of his own. So odds are good, the Harvard family, long since gone. To understand who he actually is, you need to understand the upperclassmen houses here on the campus. So, all these brick buildings that you're looking at here in the yard, which is a fenced-in area, these are first-year dormitories. A lot of people think this is Harvard. In fact, it's all student housing. First years have the special privilege of living right in the middle of campus. But after you move out of the yard, after you move out of your first-year dormitory, you move into an upperclassman house for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And each one of those upperclassman houses is named after a president of the university. So President Mather gets Mather House. President Dunster gets Dunster House. President Lowell gets Lowell, fill in the blank. Anybody? House. Very good. Early on in Harvard's history, there was a president by the name of President Hoar, H-O-A-R. You see the problem? Yeah. Students didn't like President Hoar very much. He was known for flogging them, throwing books at their head when they got in trouble. And so, the students asked President Hoar to pose for this statue, thinking he'd never be famous. And that's who you see sitting there today, the biggest whore on campus. Last thing about this statue is that golden foot. That golden foot is rubbed by people all over the world for good luck. I've seen parents rub that foot. I've seen kids rub that foot. I've seen parents pick up their kids and rub their kids' faces all over that foot. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that foot is unguarded on a college campus. So if you're so bold to walk up and rub the golden foot for good luck, you should just wash your hands for better luck. One of the big traditions here on the campus is before you graduate, got to hop up on the statue and, well, pee on that foot. There you go. That wraps up this.
Did you pee on the foot?
Yeah. Every tradition, baby. Every tradition fulfilled. So while we're walking around, this is typically where we begin the tour. It's a big square in the middle of campus called the Yard. It's a big fenced-in area. Campus goes off in every single direction all throughout the city of Cambridge. Goes off in every single direction. And so, the Yard is really the centerpiece. It doesn't matter if you're an undergrad, graduate student, you're pretty much walking through the Yard at least once a day. What we're looking at here is this gate behind me. This gate behind me is the Johnston Gate. The Johnston Gate has a big myth around it. It says you can only walk through that gate once as an incoming freshman or a first-year student, then once as a graduating senior or fourth-year student. And if you walk through that gate at any other time in your life, you're cursed with real bad luck. Ooh. Luckily, we haven't walked through that gate yet. Typically, a lot of people walk through the side gate, except for the ones that don't know. So you got to spare yourself some bad luck. Now, looking around, there are some old-looking buildings. There are some expensive-looking buildings. One of these buildings is actually the most expensive per square foot here on the campus. Most expensive per square foot. Off to my left, this is Harvard Hall. Harvard Hall, there's a few classrooms. It's also a library. And off to my right, this is Massachusetts Hall. Massachusetts Hall is the oldest student dormitory. It was built in 1720. It was home to John Adams, second president of the United States, John Hancock, first and largest signer of the Declaration of Independence, and Samuel Adams, who is the guy on the beers. Top floor of the university is actually where the president stays. So the president actually lives in a suite on the top floor. right above the students. So if you really want to piss them off, you just play a little drums. But the most expensive building, at least per square foot here on the campus, the most expensive building per square foot is actually this little building right here. This little gray one right by the gate. And that building is the Johnston Guardhouse. Here's what happened. Harvard declared this area a historical site. When they did that, they had to have a very specific type of architecture placed here that matched all of the old architecture that was already here. So they sent the blueprints off for this guardhouse once, gets rejected. They send it off twice, gets rejected. They send the blueprints off for this guardhouse 80 times before it was approved to be built, making it worth several $100,000, over $15,000 a square foot. All for a glorified porta potty. Now you know where all the tuition money goes.